So if you're joining us for the first time, Simon Communities of Ireland, we're a small office. We're based in Dublin and we work nationally around policy and research and advocacy and lobbying and pre-budget submissions and all of those lovely things. So we were in Boswell's yesterday watching the budget, looking out for an acknowledgement of the fact that there is a homeless crisis. It's not just a housing crisis, there's homelessness, which is caused by the housing crisis and the unaffordability of homes. But anyway, we won't get into that part yet. But we have Simon Talks, we do them a couple of times a year on different topics that people from the Simon communities around Ireland might ask about, or other things that are coming up or that are timely. So this is a very, very timely one, the day after the budget. So just for those of you joining, the Q&A function is there for you if you want to put in questions while Louise is presenting, or otherwise just wait until the end. Louise will be presenting probably for about 25 minutes-ish, 30, we'll see. And then we'll come back out and we'll have a Q&A. And sorry, and my name is Bear Grogan. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Executive Director with Simon Communities of Ireland. And yeah, I think we're going to kick off, Louise, because I think, as you said, there could be lots of questions. Just to say a huge, huge thank you. It's literally the day after the budget. Louise was in RTE for most of the day yesterday doing panel discussions around the budget as it was happening, and was on the late debate and everything last night. So we're really, really grateful that Louise is joining us this afternoon to give us her initial thoughts about Budget 2026, based off the information that we have yesterday. I know some departments, you have to wait for a couple of days before you get kind of more full details. But this is Louise's role as Head of Social Justice and Policy with St Vincent and then also many of you will know Louise through her work with Spark, the Single Parents Alone Raising Kids, and just general good egg, caring about people and things. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from Louise now. So as I said, just if you want to put Q&A in the questions and answers box, or wait until Louise has finished the slideshow, and we'll stop sharing the slideshow and we'll come out and we'll have a chat then. So Louise, over to you. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thanks a million, Bear, and thanks for the opportunity to talk and just give my thoughts around the budget. Now, I've done this briefing, so there's a lot of things going on about the budget and a lot of things, that will be addressing supply and VAT around housing and all that type of thing. I'm not going to be looking at any of that today. Today, I'm just looking at how the budget will impact on people already experiencing homelessness or people at risk of homelessness through poverty. The lens I'm taking today is very much analysing where we are with housing and homelessness, homelessness at the moment, because in my mind, there has been a drastic shift in how homelessness is presenting itself. And I wanted to go through what I've been observing in the last year or so. So as you can see, I present my homeless figures slightly different because I want things broken down. What we're so often hearing in the news is we'll hear things like there's 7,170 people homeless, single people homeless, and then 2,391 families homeless. And to me, that presents the problem as if it's single people are more at risk of homelessness. But I think we need to drill down further and see what's actually happening in the trends. So what we see are people and families. There are actually 9,183 people in families and 7,170 people, single adults. And it's not that I want to pitch one group against the other, because all homelessness is wrong. It's fundamentally wrong. But I think we need to start realizing where the real issues are and what's happening so we can stop the trends. We know that there are strategies around housing first, youth homelessness. There's nothing around family homelessness. And without that, we can see real drivers of family homelessness. So if we look at the figures for August 2025, and I just want to take a bit of time to go through them. So we can see that there's 9,183 people are part of families in emergency accommodation. And shockingly, and really shockingly, and not getting enough attention, is the 5,145 children in emergency accommodation. I will remember the time, and I'm sure most people on the call will remember the time when we were coming up to breaching 1,000 children emergency accommodation. Once we got through that 1,000, it was like, well, now it's 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000. We need to call a halt on it. 5,000 is 5,000 too many. If we're looking at families, then we can see that there's 2,000 in that 5,000, that 9,183 people, that's made up of 2,391 families. And again, what we can see in that is that the majority of them, about 58% of them, are lone parent families. And that's despite the fact in the general population, lone parents are only about 24% of the population of people with children, but in homelessness, they're about 58%. And I just wanted to go through then, like last month, we had an increase, a large increase in single adult homelessness, went up by 95. And that was a big increase because over the last few months, that hasn't been going up. People and families went up by 200, and the majority of that was 131 were in with children. And looking at the year to date, so far, and I think this is really important, these are the figures from the increase from January to August. We saw that there was a net increase of homelessness of 1,849 people. Out of that 1,849, 1,166 were in families and 683 were single adults. In the family category, there was a net increase of 299 families. 213 of them are in lone parent households. 86 of them are in two-parent households. There's absolutely a clear trend emerging. And unless we start discussing it, we're not going to address it. And again, one of the things that are strange, when we look at adult-only homelessness, we can see in the last year that there were an increase of 406 men and 448 women. And again, that's because it's being driven by homelessness and families, and we can see that through the stats. So I think if we're going to start making these changes, we need to acknowledge where the problem lies, and those stats, I think, surely clearly show it. And again, I just wanted to go historically and look at historically, and I've gone back to January 29, and if you could right up to August 2025. And as you can see, back in January 2019, we did see that family homelessness was really emerging as an issue. Then we can see the big drop down, which correlates to when COVID came in and the emergency measures that came in around putting people in their own homes, own front doors. We also saw bans on eviction and all of that. And we saw quite a drastic decrease in family homelessness. Then again, we see in April 2022, when the eviction ban lifted, almost exponential rise in family homelessness. And then on the other side, if we look at adult-only homelessness, we can see an almost constant gradual incline all the way up. So there's a few things I would say about that. And one of them gives me hope, because obviously it's really difficult to break through single adult homelessness, because even during COVID, things didn't happen. And we didn't see the massive decreases that we did see in family homelessness. But in family homelessness, measures did work. And we have to remember that, because when we talk about homelessness, it's become such an intractable issue, and we seem to think that we cannot break through family homelessness, that we just have to accept it, that there's a nearly fait accompli about it. But there isn't. Solutions worked. When we had that eviction ban, we can see there was a drop in it, and it only rose again when when the ban was lifted. So we know solutions will work, and we need to start implementing them. And we know that poverty is causing family homelessness. Again, this is just a pie chart, which is showing adult-only homelessness in the blue and family homelessness in the orange. So we know that in family homelessness, it's not because of addiction or mental health or criminal past. It is poverty causing it. Obviously, poverty and supply and lack of affordability. And looking at that, we know the families that with children are experiencing higher rates of poverty, and we know those are children in lone parent households. So if we look, we know that, say, statewide, the consistent poverty rate is 5% at the moment, and that was an increase from 2023. So we saw that went up from 3.6 to 5%. Now, if we look at child poverty, we can see child poverty is 8.5%, much higher than the 5% of the general population. But we need to break that down further. And if we look at it, we can see that children in two-parent families, they have a consistent poverty rate of 6%, but children in one-parent families have a consistent poverty rate of 11%. So when we're talking about child poverty, we have to be clear, the vast majority of poor children live in one-parent households. And if we have any chance of reducing homelessness, as I said, we could see this stat there, that 299 families, net increase, 299 families in emergency accommodation since the start of this year, 213 of them were lone parent households. This poverty is driving that family homelessness. We cannot de-link them. We can't decouple them. We have to address poverty in these families if we're going to address the family homelessness issue. And another group that we know are experiencing poverty, and also because of that homelessness, are people with a disability. And as I said, the general consistent poverty rate is 5%. We have to look at people with a disability, and their rate of consistent poverty is 19%. So it's really clear, if we want to do something about homelessness, again, I keep saying it, we can't get away from having those robust social protection systems that protect people from that poverty. And that's where I think my emphasis today is going, has Budget 2026 done anything to address the poverty, the increase in poverty in the last year? And will it do anything in Budget 2026? And will it make housing and living expenses more affordable for people? And when we're looking at children, we also need to break down what children, so we've talked about children being in poverty, we're looking at children with social protection. And I use the MESL data, which comes from St. Vincent de Paul, the Vincentian Partnership within us. I looked at the minimum essential standard of living, because that shows us what percentage of the needs are being met by social protection system. It would include everything from the child support payment to the back to school clothing and footwear allowance, to child benefit, to medical cards, everything that is to support people to make sure they're meeting their needs. And I'm just going to ask you to look at the 2025 rates, and it's going to explain some of our asks later on. So there is a purpose why I'm doing this. I do not want to be seen like that I'm preferring one group over another. It's just literally trying to use the evidence. So if we look in 2025, infants got 113% of their needs met by social protection. That's great. That's where we would be expecting. That gives people flexibility, and that's what we would hope for all children. If we look at preschool children, so from 2 to 4, we're seeing they're getting 115% of their needs met by social protection. Again, that's positive. That's what we want to see. We don't want to see that dropping. When we get to primary school, though, however, if you look at that, only 80% of a child in primary school's needs are met by the social protection system. And what that means, if their needs aren't being met, a parent's primary social welfare rate are trying to make up that deficit, trying to make that. If you're going to try to have to make up that 88% deficit and pay a half top up to a landlord, you can see where the struggle becomes really real. And then the next group are where we get to children over 12 plus, and they're basically in second level school. And this is really worrying, because they're only getting 64% of their needs met by social protection. And just to say, in St. Vincent de Paul, we can clearly see that too from the calls that we receive. They're basically, a lot of the calls we receive, the majority of them are headed by single people, whether that's with children or without children. It's people living alone are struggling the most on social welfare. And we can see that from all the MESL data as well. But people with children who are over, are in primary school, they're going to struggle, because not only are their rates insufficient for them, they're also making up the deficit for their children. And then when we get calls in, we get calls from people with teenage children. They just cannot make that. On a day-to-day living, 64% of the needs being met leaves too much of a deficit. That's why when we were advocating for changes in Budget 2026, We really wanted to see the child support payment making that clear differential and making sure it bridges those gaps for the children over 12. So I will explain, like, what we asked for would have been a €6 increase in the child support payment for children under 12. So that would mean that most children would be well protected by that. And for children over 12, we looked for a €15 increase. So we really wanted to see that strong differential that acknowledges the costs of older children. So this is where we were putting our asks together, and we were analysing them yesterday on what we got. And we used our MESL data, the ESRI, the CSO Silk data. So our asks they didn't just come out of nowhere. They were really evidence-based asks on what we believed would be necessary to lift people out of poverty. And bear in mind, the roadmap for social inclusion ends in December of this year. The government has a commitment to reduce consistent poverty to 2%, and yet we have people on a disability on a consistent poverty rate of 19%. €55 per week. We would have asked for €16 increase in core social welfare payments. As far as we were concerned, anything under €11 was what would be needed to maintain purchasing power back in 2020. Anything below that, you're talking about really impacting people's core living, and also not doing anything to address the poverty that's needed to end homelessness and also to lift people out of poverty. We also asked for €9.50 increase in fuel allowance. And again, that's based on facts. So what we've seen is, since the energy crisis, we've seen 70% increase in electricity and 100% increase in gas payments. Yet we didn't see any changes in the fuel allowance since 2020. Nothing to take into account these increasing costs. Now, they were masked. They were absolutely masked by the energy credits and the one-off payments over the last 2 or 3 years. But what those payments did, while they helped protect people, they papered over the chronic and the structural deficits in the social protection system that is not keeping people safe. So that's why it was so necessary, if you're getting rid of the energy credits, that €9.50 was put in place. We asked for the €6 increase in child support payment, which I explained why, and the €15 for children over 12. We asked for an increase in the living alone allowance, because it's a really targeted way of getting to people who are living alone, and our experience in St. Vincent de Paul, and also through the CSO Silk data shows that people living alone at the greatest risk of poverty. We asked for an extension of fuel allowance to recipients of working family payment. For people who don't know, working family payment is a payment that people are eligible to if they're working 38 hours a fortnight or more, but their income is below a certain threshold. So these are families who are struggling, and they would have really felt the impact of the energy crisis and the increase in fuel costs for them. So we thought extending the fuel allowance to those recipients would really help lift those families out of poverty. And then we also wanted an increase in the income disregard for one-parent family allowance and job seekers transition to €205. And that's an important ask, because when the one-parent family allowance was introduced in 1997, there was no minimum wage, but by 2000 there was a minimum wage. And at that stage, the income disregard was $147.50. And that equated to 26.25 minimum hour national minimum wage. So it meant that a lone parent could work for 26 hours without getting any of her social welfare impacted. And that extra money could really lift a parent out of poverty, go towards the extra costs of working, and really keep people in the workforce for when they were able to work more hours. That again has not kept in line with inflation, and certainly hasn't increased since 2020. We asked for it to be restored to 205. It's currently at €165. We asked for it to be restored to €205. That would have been an extra €20 into the pockets of people who were working and on one-parent family allowance. And just to let you know that when I said to you that it was 26.25 hours is what people could work before the social welfare, because the income disregard hasn't kept up to pace as inflation has, that now equates to just about 12.22 hours is all that a lone parent can work before her social welfare is cut. So that was an important one to protect. Again, it's all about targeting the payments to those who are at most risk. But what did we get? So we got no cost to disability payment, and that's really upsetting, and it will mean that people will be really struggling next year. And with the, like, we did all want the end of those one-off temporary emergency measure payments and more put into a structural reform. They pulled the plug on the one-off payments, and people on a disability will be about €1,400 worse off a year. And bear in mind, they'll be €1,400 worse off a year, already experiencing consistent poverty and deprivation rates higher than any other part of the population. So that was really disappointing. We got the €10 increase in core social welfare payments. That is not going to be enough to sustain people next year. We see continuing increases in energy costs and food, and people on lower incomes, they don't have the discretionary payment. Their money is going towards those things like food and energy, and that's where inflation is increasing. We know that €10 increase does not restore back to 2020 levels, so that's worrying. We asked for the €9.50 in fuel allowance, we got €5. Again, we know that people are going to have to use their core social welfare payment to make up that deficit, and that again will put people at huge risk. We've asked for the €8 increase. What we got was €8 for child support payment for under 12s, which was more than we asked for. We're not going to say no to it, but it's more than we asked for, and €16 for children over 12. Again, €1 more than we asked for, but hopefully it'll help families. We didn't get any increase in the living alone allowance, which is really disappointing, because we heard this budget was one about targeting. If you are going to use social protection to target, you target to people living alone. They're the ones that all the stats show are living in poverty. We got no increase in the income disregard for lone parents, so we're still on €165, €19.50 more than it was back 27 years ago. We did get a working family payment threshold increase of €60 per child. What that means in real terms is €36 per child per week, which will be very welcome to those. We got the extension of fuel allowance to working family payment recipients, and that will benefit about almost 50,000 families, and they'll be getting an extra €38 per week for 28 weeks of the year. It's going to start in March, but it'll be backdated till June. So they'll get 14 weeks this year and then 28 going on from there on in. And then an extension of the back to school clothing and footwear allowance to 2 and 3 year olds. Not sure where that came from. I don't know any group who asked for it, but again, it's supporting younger children, so we won't knock it. But is it going to help those families who are most at risk? Unlikely. So I just wanted to show some case studies, and I just did a person with a disability and a lone parent with one child under 12. And I just wanted to show you what we asked for and what the budget is giving, and just showing how that won't really do what we need to do to help reduce homelessness. So the cost of disability payment would have been €55 a week. The core increase we looked for would have been €16 per week. The fuel allowance of €9.50, and then so that would have all totaled to €81 per week, or €4,186 per year. What we got was the €10 increase in the core social welfare payment, €5 in the fuel allowance, so a total increase of €15 per week, or just €780 per year. For a lone parent with one child, we asked for a core social payment, a CS payment of €6, we got €8. We got the core social welfare payment of €16, we got €10. The fuel allowance of €9.50, and we got €5. So what we would have looked for that family to protect them would have been €32 per week. What we got was €23 per week. So while it sounds brilliant that we got the increases in the child support payments, and it does sound targeted towards children, if you do not help lift the parent as well, and the deficit in the core social welfare payment and the deficit in the fuel allowance means that any increase in the child support payment is wiped out. So while it's targeted that it looks like it's going to help children because it's just taken it from the household budget, it's not really going to do it. So we're seeing a €9 less per week than what we believe, based on our MESL research, is needed to sustain that family. So again, how this budget is going to help address families who are really struggling with the hot top of landlords to try affordable. I think more people are going to end up in poverty next year, and certainly in deprivation. And that's really worrying. So I really think one of the things that we really needed this budget to do was to actually couple together poverty and homelessness, and make sure that it's not just prevention of, saying we'll help you look for another property, but preventing people by giving them the incomes they need to survive and to pay their rents. And I think that's it. Yeah, I won't go through the rest of it, and that's it. So thank you, Bear. If you want to hop on, and we can ask for questions if there's any.
Thanks so much, Louise. I was here taking notes and like looking in at the screen. Do you want to actually just stop screen sharing there?
I will.
And so if anyone has any specific questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box there, and we can go through them. Something that lots of things jumped out at me during the presentation, Louise, and thanks so much for pulling the case studies as well together, because I think for me anyway, budget day, it's just an onslaught of kind of announcements in really quick succession, and like that you're trying to figure out, well, is this something that's welcome, or are there going to be things attached to it, or that kind of stuff. So looking at your asks compared to what was actually got, and if we take out disability, I know we were all absolutely very, very disappointed and annoyed that cost of disability has been acknowledged verbally and in the programme for government, but then that there was nothing yesterday. But you did actually, there were quite a few measures that they seem to have partially taken on board.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the child support payment is definitely welcome. But what I didn't have time to do there, and I just want to discuss it really briefly, was there was a lot of support for people on working family payment. And I suppose that kind of reflects what the government is doing. Like, they're rewarding people who are working rather than targeting people who aren't working. And I know there was that debate before the budget, and that seems to have come out in this, in like, if you look at the analysis. So as I said there earlier, like what you're seeing for a lone parent who's on social welfare, she got her €5 increase in in fuel allowance, the €10 for her core social welfare payment, and €8 for her child. So that's €23 per week. And that group would be the poorest of lone parents. But if you're looking for somebody on working family payment, and again, I know they're low income, so it's certainly not pitching one against the other, but it's just looking where the targeted supports went. They would have gotten an increase of €36 per week per child, as opposed to the €8 for children on social welfare, or 16 for the older children. They would have got a €36 per increase per child, and they got the increase of the fuel allowance, which is definitely needed. But they would have gotten €74 per week, as opposed to the lone parent not working, who would have gotten 23. So there was definitely some way that this budget was not poverty proofed, but more, what politically proved what they wanted. Political choices were made, I would say. And I think you can see that in the case studies.
And I think, like, we were all quite optimistic, I suppose, would have been the first budget of this government, and the fact that they spoke so much about targeted measures. We need targeted measures. And I remember thinking, even with, the once-off payments, that they weren't going to be repeated, and thinking, well, that's grand. Like, don't give me energy credits. I'd much prefer, for there to be an increase in social protection payments to lone parents who aren't working or who are in consistent poverty. So, and based off your comment there, so it was targeted, but as you said, maybe towards the more that
Yeah.
kind of messaging. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, like I just think the 70 euro per week, and don't get me wrong, it's something we all really acknowledge that we needed fuel allowance for working family payments. We needed them protected, but they got 74 euro for one child, and a lone parent not working got 23 euro per week. And again, you could replicate that through. So somebody with a disability got very little. Again, they would have just gotten the 10 euro and the 5 euro. They would have just gotten the 15 euro per week, as opposed to then a carer who is working got their income disregard increased massively again, which is great for them. And you know, again, not pitching one against the other, but it was the person working who got the greater support rather than the person who couldn't work, for whether it's because they've children, whether it's because they've a disability, whatever reason it was, they weren't getting as much from this budget as somebody who is working.
Mm. And I think, and you mentioned that a couple of times as well about, it's not about pitching groups against each other or saying, one group or person is more deserving. And I completely get that. And I suppose sometimes again, when we're lobbying and we're going in and we're asking and advocating for change, they'll say, oh, well, we don't have a money tree and we don't have endless amounts of money. And but one of the things for me that was stark yesterday was the sheer amount of incentives and tax credits and relief for developers and construction industry, like the VAT reduction, so as you said, there were choices made that, the question that I got to put to the minister this morning on Morning Ireland was those tax cuts for developers, what measurable outcome, is that going to be tied to around homelessness and reducing homelessness and stopping the flow of people being forced into homelessness? And I think that's a disappointment from yesterday as
Yeah.
well. And I know I said this to you when we were prepping just at the start, the fact that the word homelessness was not mentioned in the opening two speeches. Like I think there's an acknowledgement, there's a talk around housing, but again, it seems to be targeted at, people who maybe are working, are trying to get a mortgage, or this term of a starter home. It really it drives me wild, because people need a home. This isn't a thing about, so like that messaging around, oh, we'll give back cuts for the apartments so that you can buy your starter home apartment, and then without mentioning at all the factors of homelessness. So with the work that you do and the families that you support, did you feel that omission yesterday as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and when I say I'm not pitching one group at the other, I don't think any of us would want to do that. And I know that, any of us, but what we are asking for is use the evidence base that's there and target the payments to where there's evidence base. And one of the things that struck me was the landlords got retrofitting if they retrofitted their property, which is great for them to get a tax break. But there should be some incentive that if they're getting, states money that will, protect tenants. And I agree with that, because we know for a fact that many, this just transition coming in, that people are in private rental households, they're relying on HAP, they cannot avail of an SEAI grant, they can't retrofit their home, they can't put in the triple glaze to reduce their thing. They have got a higher carbon footprint because their homes are poorly insulated. So that's really, like in one theory, you're saying, great, the landlords are getting a tax break for retrofitting their homes, but surely it should be tied to, ensuring your property stays in the rental sector and that the tenant gets the benefit of it, not that the landlord's getting the benefit of improving his asset. So it's things like that there's some level of targeting, but not hooking it into, well, who should be the beneficiary of this targeting? Is it the landlord? Is it the builder who's getting a deficit, decrease in his VAT rate? Or is it the person who can't afford the home? And there just seems to be, we go so far, but it's not going far enough. And I think the retrofitting is an example of that. And again, I suppose one of the things I'm really keen to talk about is the fuel allowance, because we know it's such an essential support. And to think that it only got €5 when we've had these massive onslaught of increases in energy costs. And people in higher incomes can do something to offset that. They can retrofit, they can insulate their attic, they can get triple glazing and say we can do that. But people are at the beck and call of their landlords and cannot do anything to offset that. And they're just getting these onslaught of costs without any support around it, and that they're only now being given €5 per week to cover costs that have gone up, who've doubled almost in the last 5 years. It just means that people will end up in cold homes. And again, while we already know that we know that there's 300,000 households in energy arrears at the moment before we go into winter. There's 170,000 in gas arrears before we go into winter. And the really important point about that is that does not include people on pay-as-you-go meters. And most of them would be on lower income households in the first place. And we know anecdotally from the SVP work, and we have pushed and asked the CRU, the Commission for Regulation of Utilities, to get this data. We know people are self-disconnecting because they run out of money. We know there are children in houses that the electricity is gone on a Monday and the money doesn't come in till a Wednesday, Thursday. We know there are old people who are in the similar situation. We definitely know there's people with disability who are on meters, who are self-disconnecting. It's really important we get this data, because while we all focus on the 300,000 and the 170,000, it is really important we do acknowledge there's real energy poverty in the country at the moment, and it's shown by the arrears, but we also need to, bolster that data with the data of how many pay-as-you-go meters are running out and are disconnecting once a month, twice a month, how often they're on. And the suppliers have to have that information. And why we can't get that through CRU, I don't know, because I think it would should show such a starker picture.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. And I think, like you've mentioned as well, around kind of the evidence piece. And I laughed when you said, sorry, I'm keeping an eye on the Q&A box as well there to make sure nothing is popping up. I'll ask you one more question, then I'll leave you go, because I know you're in demand and you've been working around the clock. You mentioned, so sorry, two things: the back to school clothing and footwear allowance. I laughed when you said no one actually asked her that. Like, sometimes I wonder, we put so much effort into our pre-budget submissions and consultations and like that.
Well, firstly, 2 and 3-year-olds aren't going back to school, so they certainly don't need the back to school clothing and footwear allowance. Secondly, if you look at the MESL data, all their needs are met by social protection anyway. So if we were going to look for that extra money, we would look for it to go to where we know there's needs. So I don't know where they came up with it. And that actually raises a really, really good point, Bear, as well. If you remember last year, and I want to know how they get their lobbying skills, because I want to get those type of lobbying skills. We suddenly got 9 million towards phone pouches for schools that nobody asked for. We don't know where it came from. It certainly wasn't anybody in our sector looking for it. Now, to me, that 9 million would have been a lot, as we know, the education system drastically changed for fifth years, for upcoming leaving cert that went into fifth year this September. Many of those young people who are starting their leaving cert course in September, it's the whole course has changed. It's all project-based, assessment-based, which we've all looked for, continuing assessment, all of those really good things. But you need a laptop to do it. You cannot be expecting some child to be working on a Mac with all the best AI tools going for it, and another child to be sitting on her bed working off a mobile phone, trying to do PDFs and whatever. Now, to me, that when they knew this new curriculum was coming in, and the fifth years were going to go in, and they would all need a laptop to at least even try to do the homework, why that 9 million couldn't have given like 15,000, and that's what I worked out. If you looked at that 9 million and looked at a cost of a laptop, so €600, and instead gave 15,000 laptops to school, DESH schools, or to people who needed the schools, and made sure that every child in fifth year had access to a laptop. That seems to me a better use of money than a 9 million to a phone pouch that nobody needed or asked for. So
Mm.
sorry, I'm going off puff, but it's just when you brought up about the back to school, I just thought it was funny that I don't know how these people have better lobbying skills than us, but if we could recruit one to us, it would be great.
I know, and you know what? I was forgetting completely about the phone pouches last year because, yeah, and I know you see every year as well, people kind of mention the amount of money that gets allocated to the horse racing fund compared to domestic violence services and things like that. And you would definitely wonder about some of the decision making processes. But before I let you go, just because you mentioned it a couple of times, and it's something we see in our locked out of the market report, the HAP, so the housing assistance payment, you mentioned top ups. So is that something you're seeing across the board in St. Vincent de Paul?
Completely. It's one of, it's people when, and it's kind of a hidden problem, and it's something we're trying to get our hands on better, because what we find is that people phone up looking for food, and then when a volunteer goes out, to give them the food, and they break it down and say, why do you need the food? In general, there's so many cases that we find out then it's because they're giving €400 a month to a landlord. We've one case in Cork, they're giving €700 a month to a landlord. And, these are people who qualify for social housing. They got the HAP because they qualify for social housing. That means they should be paying their social housing rent to the local authority, and that should be it. But they're paying their local authority rent, and then they're paying a top up on it. And there's no, and we can even see through the CSO self data as well, that the group that are most in deprivation after housing costs are paid are people who are in receipt of HAP and rent supplement, which seems an anomaly, because you're thinking, well, they're getting support with your rent, but they're basically people who should only be paying a social housing rent, and they're double paying. And as HAP goes on longer and longer and longer, we see that rent is allowed to be going up 2% every year, but the HAP payment hasn't been going up 2%. And people are bridging that every year with their own money. And 5 or 6 years in a tenancy, the payment has gone too much, and people just can't make it.
Yeah, and it's really like I knew there wouldn't be an announcement yesterday. For those of you still online, myself and Louise attend the National Homeless Action Committee meetings that are chaired by the Minister, and I asked the last day about their HAP review and kind of a time frame for that. And like the way they explained it, there won't be anything happening next year either. So the rents, as you said, are just going to continue to rise, and the HAP limits are stagnant. So it's a stark picture, I think, that we're painting
And just to
yesterday.
say, in SVP, we did ask for that, because we were aware, as you are aware, that there's nothing happening in the HAP at the moment. So what we asked for would that be that the Department of Social Protection would step up with a supplementary payment for people where their income, where their payment is too high, and they're not left with a supplementary welfare income to live on, that there would be some type of payment to bridge that gap. But again, we didn't receive that in the budget. But that would have been a key help to sustain people in households. And we know that arrears are driving people into homelessness too. So something like the HAP top-ups are really crucial if we're going to end family homelessness or single homelessness.
Yeah, and I think maybe, it is painting a stark picture for us for next year, but maybe it means, some of us in the sector, we were kind of waiting to see, it's like, let's see how the government performs in the budget, and let's maybe take their word for some things. And the programme for government, we welcome some of the measures. So, but I think now after this, we can all regroup together before the end of the year and come up with our plans for from January 26th around campaigning together the things that we need to ask for, whether it's legislative change, things like that, that we're really because I know, like, even that's the consistent poverty rate. It's like, oh yeah, sure, our target is 2%. I know even we did our submission on the roadmap for social inclusion and said, can we not at least be ambitious and say that our target is 0%?
Well, we've as much chance of meeting that as
but at least try, and
but I would say, and I suppose they are public meetings, so I will say it. I don't think we're revealing anything. But as you mentioned earlier, that we're both on the National Homeless Action Committee, and they did present a prevention strategy. And genuinely, I thought I was in another universe, because the prevention strategy was all on personal failings and nothing on structural failings. It was all about addressing people who had mental health issues, who were leaving prison, who had addiction issues, who were leaving care, and and none of it was on poverty or affordability or lack of supply. And it just felt like you're not even looking at other causes. You're still seeing it as a single person homeless issue for people with mental health issues. Of course, people with mental health issues and addiction issues need that support. And of course, we should have those prevention measures. But unless we have a holistic approach that also includes poverty, social protection, and affordability and supply, we're not going to end homelessness, and certainly not by 2030.
And there's no even acknowledgement that poverty itself causes mental health difficulties, and
Absolutely.
intergenerational poverty and trauma and everything that can lead to adverse childhood experiences and things like that. Sorry, I just see Julie had just said, yeah, that she didn't notice anything about updating the rent supplement rates either. So yeah, some worrying things, but I think we need to keep going, because let's focus on the positives. There were some good measures. So it's just, yeah, we'll try and get some lobbying tips from the phone pouch
Phone
people.
pouch.
um, so thank you so honestly, I appreciate it so much. And I think, I'm delighted they had you in RCE yesterday for the day and on the late debate, because your voice is so important for the sector. And the work that you do is incredible. So I know you must be wrecked, but thank you from us for being one of those voices, one of the voices of reason, that's at in those spaces. And we will see you again. Thank you so much.
And
Thanks
thanks
to
for the
everyone.
invite, Bear. Thank you. And thanks to everybody who turned up.
Yes, and a big thanks to Ailish as well, for pulling it all together. Sorry, people are just saying thank you now in the Q&A. So thanks so much, everyone. We'll see you all soon.